This happened in 2013. I had graduated from college the year before with a degree in education. My goal was to become a teacher, and I was lucky enough to land a job at a high school in a quiet town in Illinois. For the first few weeks, I had to shadow another teacher. It was meant to help me prepare to run my own class. But honestly, it felt more like being a glorified teaching assistant. I mostly sat in on lessons and helped out when needed. That day, I was in a chemistry class, and during a lab session, we needed a set of flasks for the experiment. All the lab equipment was stored in a supply closet at the far end of the building. I volunteered to go grab them. It was only a short walk, maybe a couple of minutes, and I reached the supply room without issue. As I started looking through the shelves, my phone buzzed. It was an automatic text from the school. Being part of the staff, I was required to sign up for emergency notifications. The message read, "Lockdown in effect. This is not a drill." My stomach dropped. If I tried running back to the classroom, the door would likely already be locked, and I'd be left exposed in the hallway. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned off the light and pulled the supply closet door shut, pressing myself into the cramped space. Seconds later, the alarm blared through the school. The usual classroom noises, students talking, footsteps, even the hum of the overhead lights went silent. Then my phone vibrated again. Remain in lockdown. Suspected armed intruder in the building. Police have been notified. I could feel my pulse pounding. I wasn't safe in here. If someone came looking, there was nowhere to go. Then I heard footsteps. Fast. Running. They stopped right outside the closet door. The doorknob twisted. The door opened. Before I could even react, I found myself face to face with a man. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. I'd never seen him before. "Mind if I hide in here with you?" he asked, breathless. I hesitated. Something felt off, but he looked scared, and I wasn't in a position to argue. I moved aside as much as I could, and he squeezed in. He told me he'd been teaching a class down the hall when the lockdown started. That immediately set off an alarm in my head. Why wasn't he locked in with his students? Before I could ask, my phone vibrated again. "Do not open classroom doors for any reason. Suspect described as older male with a beard." I hadn't gotten a great look at the guy in the dark, but from what I could see, he fit the description. I had no time to think. I just reacted. I shoved the door open and sprinted. I didn't look back. I ran straight to the nearest exit, bursting into the parking lot. My car was at the far end, and I didn't stop until I was inside with the doors locked. Breathing hard, I turned to look back at the building. Nothing. No one had followed me. 25 minutes later, I got a final message. Lockdown lifted. Police have cleared the building. Later, I learned how the man had gotten in. He had convinced the front office that he was there to pick up his kid. The lockdown was called after someone spotted a gun holster under his jacket. Several teachers reported hearing someone trying to force their doors open. By the time police arrived, he was gone. Security cameras caught glimpses of him, but never a full view of his face. The footage confirmed one thing, though. He was armed. I watched the footage myself, and even though I'll never be 100% sure, I'm almost certain it was him, the man who hid in the closet with me. It was the last period of the day, senior year of high school. I had an off period, so my school days were usually shorter. A couple of my friends, Brandon and Josh, had their schedules set up the same way. Our third friend, Matt, had an off period every other day, but today wasn't one of them. Since it was Friday and the weather was perfect, we were all texting about heading to the lake. Matt said he was planning to sneak out of gym early to come with us, so we were waiting for him near the gym hallway. This hallway was in a quieter part of the school, and the only people passing through were students heading to gym class. Matt texted us that he'd wait until the teacher took attendance, then sneak back to the locker room and meet us. So we waited. He was taking longer than expected. At the end of the hallway, there was a set of exit doors. They weren't meant to be used as an entrance, but suddenly someone pushed through them from outside. Even though it was a warm, sunny day, this guy came in wearing black sweatpants, a zipped-up hoodie with the hood up, and a black backpack. We all went silent as he passed, locking eyes with each of us. His stare was ice-cold, unsettling. Brandon stepped up and said, "What, dude, get lost." The guy stopped mid-step, turned to Brandon, and asked if he had a problem. Josh and I immediately stepped in, telling Brandon to drop it, just over and over, until the guy finally turned and kept walking. We all agreed he seemed off. He looked like he could have been a student, but none of us recognized him. He had patchy facial hair, like he was older, but not by much. A few minutes passed, and we texted Matt, telling him to hurry up. His reply made my stomach drop. "Can't. We're on lockdown." We had no idea. The gym teachers had just announced it, and everyone was hiding in the locker rooms. That's when we noticed the doors leading to the locker room hallway were closed and locked. It hit us instantly. That guy, the one in black. And then, from somewhere down the hall, a loud pop. At first, it sounded like something heavy dropping. A textbook slammed on a desk, maybe. But then, another one. And another. Gunshots. Students started screaming. My pulse exploded as I turned toward the sound. And there he was. The guy in black. Running full speed toward us. We didn't think. Didn't hesitate. Just ran. We pushed through the exit doors he'd come in from and sprinted toward the woods near the school. I looked back, twice. He was chasing us. Not close, but not far enough. He was yelling something. Most of it was garbled, but one sentence was crystal clear. "I'm gonna kill you, Fed." We made it to the trees and dropped to the ground, pressing ourselves into the dirt. My breathing was ragged, my whole body shaking. Then, footsteps, getting louder. I held my breath as I saw him moving through the woods, scanning the area. He kept running, further and further away. The second he was out of sight, we made a break for it, cutting through to the senior parking lot. Between the sprinting and the sheer panic, I don't know how I didn't throw up. I got to my car, and we all piled in. I drove straight to my house. The lake was out of the question now. That night, the news exploded in our school's group chat. One of the new teachers had been shot. Twice. He survived, but for a while, everyone thought he was going to die. No one ever figured out who the guy was, or why he targeted that teacher. As for us, I think he came after us because Brandon antagonized him. Maybe he planned to come back for him, or all of us once the school was on lockdown. But I don't think it would have mattered. Turns out the school was already tipped off about him. A neighbor saw him loitering outside, acting suspicious. This happened about 5 years ago, during my senior year of high school. I was working on a big test for my science class. It was a tough subject for me, but I had studied hard. I got so caught up in it that I completely lost track of time. By the time I realized how long I'd been sitting there, the bell had already rung. I thought about rushing through the last few questions, but I decided to take my time and finish properly. I knew I wouldn't get in trouble for being late to my next class. When I finally turned in my test, my teacher gave me a hall pass, and I headed out. The hallways were completely silent. I walked quickly, trying to get to my next class, when, out of nowhere, an announcement came over the speakers. The school was going into lockdown. I didn't know why, but I knew I didn't want to be stuck in the hallways. I picked up my pace, turning down another hallway. That's when I saw him, a man, standing right in the middle of the hall. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't a student. His hair was long and messy, and his clothes looked old and dirty. Something about him instantly sent alarms blaring in my head. But there was no way around him. I had to pass him to get to my class. I froze. He hadn't seen me yet. Slowly I turned and backed away, trying to stay out of sight. The moment I slipped around the corner, I held my breath and listened. Nothing. I didn't hear him moving then. "Hey!" His voice rang out loud and sharp. "I know you're right around the corner." My stomach dropped. I hadn't made a sound. He shouldn't have known I was here. And then, I heard footsteps, getting closer. I took off running. The second I moved, so did he. Heavy footsteps pounded behind me, fast, too fast. My heart was hammering as I turned corner after corner, hoping to see anyone. Any teacher, any student, anyone at all. But the hallways were completely empty. I wasn't fast. He was catching up. I had to get out. I sprinted toward the nearest exit, the west entrance. And that's when I saw him. A police officer. He was right by the door. As soon as the officer saw me running, he looked past me and spotted the man chasing me. The second the officer moved, the man skidded to a stop, then bolted in the other direction. The officer took off after him. A few minutes later, they caught him. The lockdown ended not long after that. To this day, I don't know who he was or how he got inside the school. The teachers never really talked about it, and no one ever explained what happened. Last year, I was a senior in high school during 5th period. I was a teacher's assistant for a science class. I would usually do whatever the teacher asked me to, like grading assignments or cleaning the lab tables. Other times, I would just do my homework or chill. It was a nice break from normal class. On this day, the science class went on a field trip, and I didn't really want to go. So the teacher let me stay back in her room and grade papers I worked for about 20 minutes, and then took a bathroom break. I got back to the room and began to grade more papers, when the phone to the classroom rang. I picked it up. It was a recorded message from the principal sent to all classrooms saying they were going on lockdown as a suspicious male was seen on school grounds. I followed the directions and shut the door, locked it, and turned off all the lights. I was a little nervous being as I was all by myself in the classroom, but I knew the door was locked and I should be okay. I tried to take my mind off by going back to grading papers. I turned on a little lamp on the desk for light. I got through about 3 more papers when I heard a noise come from the back of the classroom. The room was kind of big and had desks with lab tables behind them. I knew my mind was playing tricks on me and I kept working. Then I heard something again. This time I knew it wasn't my imagination. I looked closely around the classroom when I got to the back corner lab table. I saw it. There was a man's shoe and part of his leg that I could barely see. I was frozen and didn't know what to do. I wanted to run for the door, but I didn't know if I could make it and unlock it in time if he chased me. The teacher's desk was kind of far from the door, but I knew I had to risk it. I didn't want to stay in the room with him. I counted to 3 and then got up and calmly walked to the door about 3 steps from the door, and I heard more noise as if the man was getting up at that point. I reached for the door as fast as I could, unlocked it, and opened it. I slammed it shut behind me and ran as fast as I could. Down the hall, I heard the door open behind me. I saw the nearest staircase and ran upstairs, hoping to lose the man if he was following me. I didn't even know if he was chasing me, but I was scared out of my mind. I got upstairs and pounded on the nearest classroom door. The teacher let me in. After about 10 seconds, the man did not follow me upstairs. I got in the room and explained everything as fast as I could to the teacher, who then made a call to inform the principal. It ended up being too late, and the man was able to escape. I figure he snuck in the classroom as I went to the bathroom, and I don't know if he had intentions to harm me or not, but I'm just glad that I'm okay. I went to a high school in Oregon. Lockdown drills were routine, once a month. But only once was it real. It was a normal lunch period. I was sitting with my friend, eating and joking around when the teacher in charge of the cafeteria suddenly grabbed the microphone. "Everyone, be quiet." His voice was different, not the usual tired, annoyed tone. He sounded urgent. The whole cafeteria fell silent. Then he spoke again, and this time there was real panic in his voice. "We are now in lockdown." He didn't explain why. He just repeated that we needed to stay silent. Around me, people exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered, but most just sat frozen, listening. Then we heard it. A gunshot. Distant, but unmistakable. A single crack that seemed to freeze time. For half a second, no one moved. Then, chaos. Screams erupted across the cafeteria. People shoved their chairs back. A few ran for the exit doors. The teacher yelled for everyone to get under the tables, and this time, people actually listened. My friend and I ducked under ours, our backs pressed against the cold tile floor. The cafeteria was filled with the sound of hushed sobs, the scraping of chairs as people tried to hide. Every second felt stretched, like time was crawling. Then from across the room, more screaming, louder, closer. I peeked out, and that's when I saw him. A kid, standing outside the locked cafeteria doors, holding a gun. For a moment, he just stood there, looking inside. Then he raised the gun and fired. The first shot cracked against the glass. It didn't shatter right away. Maybe it didn't even break at all. But that was all it took. The cafeteria exploded into chaos. Students sprinted for the side exits, knocking over chairs and trays. Some tripped, got back up, kept running. My friend grabbed my arm and we ran too. I barely remember moving. I just knew I had to get out. Outside, people scattered in every direction. Some ran to their cars, others bolted off school property, vanishing into the surrounding neighborhood. I ran toward the front of the school, toward home. My legs felt weak, but adrenaline kept me moving. By the time I reached the front parking lot, the police were already arriving, their sirens cutting through the panic. But I didn't stop. I just kept running. When I got home, I could barely breathe. I told my parents everything. My dad turned on the news, and it was already being reported. Miraculously, only one girl was wounded, and somehow the police managed to apprehend the shooter without killing him. I went to a small private school where the middle and high school had only about 30 students combined. One of the assistant coaches on my middle school soccer team was a soft-spoken man who often volunteered at school events. I assumed it was because he had 2 adopted sons attending the school, one a grade above me, the other a few grades below. I barely remembered him after middle school. He was just another background figure in my early years. But after I graduated high school, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered out of curiosity. It was him, congratulating me on my graduation. At first, I thought it was just a friendly gesture, but then he called again. This time, he insisted on taking me out for a steak dinner. I tried to politely decline, but he wouldn't let it go. He started texting, then calling repeatedly. It became overwhelming. Something felt off. Eventually, I told him, firmly, to leave me alone. A couple of years passed. I was a sophomore in college when I got an email from him. The subject line was vague, but the message itself was unsettling. "Dear, I shall try one last time, not to bother, but to seek a friendship I feel could benefit us both. Most people pass through life without leaving a mark, forgotten before their time. But some leave an impression. Long ago, as a soccer coach, I met a young man of intrigue. His intelligence shone through his movements on the field. Something about him standing out, something valuable. I have tried to understand why, but all I know is that he left an imprint in my mind. Of course, society frowns upon a grown married man wanting to keep a friendship with a young man, even one that is innocent, respectful. Maybe one day, our paths will cross again. The email went on, long, rambling, listing strange examples of friendships he'd formed. A 19-year-old girl at mortuary school, a 93-year-old woman in a nursing home, a 70-year-old writer he shared glasses of wine with, a young boy who lacked a father figure. Then he ended with, "Perhaps this means nothing to you, or perhaps something, that is for you to decide." That was enough for me. I responded curtly, telling him I had forwarded the email to my father, who, luckily, was an attorney. I never heard from him again. But then my younger sister told me one of her male friends had similar encounters with this man. And that's when it got even stranger. Apparently, he worked as a mortician in the county. I later remembered something else. During the time he was calling me non-stop, he left multiple voicemails a day. Messages like, "I want to take you to a steakhouse. Anything you want. We could even have some wine at my place first. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. I think we could really get along." At first I brushed it off as awkward persistence, but after I changed my phone number and email for unrelated reasons, he somehow got my new contact information. That's when he sent the email and started calling again. After I warned him about my father, he finally stopped. Months later, something chilling happened. The county prosecutor contacted me, asking for information about him. Out of curiosity, I searched his name and email online. That's when I found 2 obituaries, teenage boys, 14 and 15, from completely different states. In both, he had posted messages on the funeral pages. The wording was eerily similar to what he wrote to me. "Parents, may God give you strength. I feel like I knew your son through our Facebook messages and grew to love and respect him deeply. My heart aches. I love you," boy's name. It was speculative, but the fact that he was writing identical messages to grieving families, about boys he likely never met, sent a shiver down my spine. And what unsettled me the most, I barely knew this man. I was a 6th grader when he was my assistant coach. I rarely even played in games. He wasn't a teacher I saw daily. I didn't leave an impression on him. Yet years later he acted as if I did.